So, Carly, approximately 50,000 Gaelic-speaking people emigrated from the Scottish Highlands to northern Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island between approximately 1770s and 1850s. That's a huge number of people. My ancestors arrived, as we just saw in movement number 1, arrived in Cape Breton in 1817 in Sydney and settled in McKinnon's Brook. Can you tell us, to start with, about the historical circumstances in Scotland that led to that mass migration?
Yeah, so your people actually came over in the second phase of what's been known as the Highland clearances. And this phase was, I would sort of characterize it as a rather aggressive phase where people are in some cases are forcibly removed from their land, so they have nowhere to go and they start leaving. Or they don't really have any economic options at home, and so they make a decision, well, there's nothing left for us here, so we're going to go. And it's just sort of death by 1,000 cuts in many ways. Mm-hmm. But it's part of this large movement of Highland pacification and change that really started after the, really got going. It started before this, but really got going after the failed Jacobite rebellion in 1745-46, mm-hmm. When landowners and government officials start to rethink what they want the Highlands to be. They want to bring it in line. They don't want to worry about any more rebellions. And part of that is changing the economy, changing the land use structures, and basically telling people the land that you've been on forever, you don't get to decide how much longer you get to stay on it. Mm-hmm. And so 1817 was a really interesting year because it was after the Napoleonic Wars. Mm-hmm. France and Britain, things are kind of done on that front, but the economies that had been sustained because of the war, and one of the big ones was kelp, the bottom fell out of it. And so all of the people that relied on that industry, they just didn't have it anymore, and there was major problems, and this would have affected your people on the Isle of Barra. Mm-hmm. And so 1817, they decide, with incentives, it's time to go. And right. They come to Cape Breton like so many others from the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Right.
So we saw something of the voyage that these people, these days we can hop on an Air Canada flight and do the hop across the pond in 5 hours from Halifax to, London or Glasgow. It was a very different trip at that time. Can you tell us something of that experience, the length of time, the kinds of conditions aboard some of those immigrant ships?
The conditions would have varied significantly. They would have been old creaking wooden vessels. The ship the William Tell that your people came over on, the voyage took just under 8 weeks. We have records that I found in the Colonial Office papers that talks about them leaving at the end of May, and then they're arriving towards like the 24th, 25th of July. So they're on the water, the open Atlantic, for that long. There would have been significant seasickness. By the time they were arriving, the food would have been going off. People would only have had what they could carry in a trunk, so families would have had probably one trunk per family, so really prized possessions, not that they had a lot, but really prized possessions would have been with them. But not fun, and you're also subject to the weather patterns, so you might start off a voyage and it's beautiful and wonderful, and then you get in the middle of the Atlantic and you're getting storms, and and there are, I don't know, I don't have the evidence for this particular boat, but there would have been lives lost at sea, and goodness, hopefully not an epidemic, a fever or something breaks out on board, because there's nothing you can do if that happens.
Do you have any sense of the general physical well-being of these people at that time? I mean, they would have been coming from a fairly I wouldn't say impoverished, but the economy, as you were saying, would have taken a real hit in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars and the kelp industry. But were they healthy to start with, getting on these ships?
I think for the most part, I haven't really come across a lot of evidence or material that would say they were not healthy. They're not sort of characterized. It would be different in the 1840s, late 1840s, for example, with the Irish and the Scots who were coming over during the famine, and then we've got really serious problems. But at this time, I would say a pretty robust population. People that they'd been the diets weren't very diverse on Barra, for example, but they were healthy enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I'm asking you this question, I'm thinking of the children depicted in our video, which were two of the children are my children, who are now 23 and 24 years old, Mary and Aidan, gnawing away at a piece of bread at the time. So
it would have been hard tack, right? Their teeth may not have been in the best of shape.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think with that, we'll go into the second movement of McKinnon's Brook Suite, which is called homesteading.